Welcome to Ocean Rockstars with Tom Neymat. Today I have a very special guest, Nassym Kavezade. She happens to be one of my favorite cousins, and she's actually flown all the way out here from Washington, D.C. Just for this podcast. No, she's down for some family gatherings, but we thought it would be a great time to have her on the podcast. Nassym, I'll go over a brief bio and then we're going to get into it. Nassym Kavezade is a forensic social worker and licensed master of social work with over 8 years of experience advocating for children, families, and unaccompanied immigrant youth in a family court proceedings. Nassym earned her Bachelor's of Science in Social Work from New York University, also known as NYU, and received her Master's of Science in Social Work from Columbia University, with a concentration on policy practice and international welfare. Nassym has extensive experience navigating New York City's child welfare system and achieving permanency for her clients through adoption, reunification, special immigrant juvenile status, and alternative means. Nassym recently relocated to Washington, D.C., and is currently a health and wellness program manager at Asylum Works, where she advocates for asylum seekers. Throughout her career, Nassym has served and advocated for the needs of her clients through case management, direct advocacy, and facilitating relevant training. The intersection of social work, advocacy, and human rights continues to be the driving force of her professional career. In addition to speaking English, she's also fluent in Persian or Farsi and also Spanish. So anyone who speaks Farsi or Spanish can also reach out to her. Yes. Today, we're very excited to have Nassym on the show. We want to get a little bit more knowledge about her experience dealing with these navigating the terrain, especially in New York and Washington, D.C., and then kind of going over the topics that we normally discuss, including mental health, addiction, and how that impacts your clients, and the situations that you've seen. So before we get into all that, I really want to hear a little bit more from you. So why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit about your background, your licensing, and the work that you've done.
Certainly. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm excited to have these conversations. These topics aren't definitely discussed enough, so I'm grateful you have this platform to have voices like mine on. So just to start, I started my career in social work thinking, I want to make the world a better place, navigate these complicated issues, solve these problems that, I really saw from my background, coming from a privileged background, and how there was so much inequity in the world. I started my career as a 20-year-old in New York City in the child welfare system, which is these are children who have been abused and neglected, and their parents are they have cases in family court, and oftentimes I did come into contact with biological parents that had severe drug addiction. What we did see was usually these cases, these families would tend to go in two different directions. There were children I saw that were born with positive toxicology, born with all these drugs in their systems. Their parents had extensive records within the family court system. So it was known that these children were unable to go back to these parents who were struggling with severe substance abuse, mental health, homelessness, every vulnerability you could imagine. So often, those types of situations, we would have to rehabilitate the children, make sure they detox from those substances, in addition to planning where are they going to live for the rest of their lives. Are they going to be adopted? Are they going to be relocated, living with their family, so on and so forth. Right. Another story I often saw too was the parents that were fighting to get their kids back. And that was, especially when we talk about substance abuse, a very difficult process, especially with the different modalities out there, the different treatment programs. And something that was hard to see was seeing the parents in recovery, fighting, coming to visit their kids, fighting to go to therapy, appear in court, do everything that they could. And the stress of having the child welfare system involved in their life would push them over the edge often, and they
Right.
would relapse.
Right.
So something I would often hear is relapse was part of the recovery, right? But when you're dealing with children, children are very vulnerable, as we know, and you can't afford to relapse and go on a hiatus for many days, leaving your child unattended. So
Right.
seeing people in the process of their change, in the process of their recovery, making those mistakes, and what I now believe what I now personally believe is you kind of have to make those mistakes in order to go forward.
Right.
So it is good to extend that amnesty, that harm reduction approach, but at the same time, people, there's so much time in a day, there's so much time in a child's life that
Right.
you need to make those changes if you're serious about being a full-time caretaker.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great, Nassym. I think you hit the nail on the head as far as, a parent, a parent who's dealing with substance use or mental health. There's so much going on in their head and in their own life that they're trying to figure their own path and try to just survive. And then you add a child into that equation, and sometimes multiple children. And so we have a lot of clients that, they're in our programs and they have kids. And so they've been distanced from their kids for a period of time. Part of it is sometimes it's voluntarily, sometimes it's involuntarily, depending on the system. But what a common theme that we see is that, they all want to be good parents, right? It's not like they just decided, hey, we want to be drug addicts or we want to have mental health problems and we'd want to neglect our kids, right? So I think a lot of people just make these assumptions based on what they see, and they say, oh, these people don't care, they're irresponsible. No, they want to be good parents just like anybody else, but they're going through all of that. And so their ability to function and to they can't even do it for themselves, let alone for these kids. And then people say, well, why do you bring kids in the world if you're going to be like that? Well, no one plans on being like that over time, right? So I think the intentions are not really as relevant as far as like what it takes to survive and then ultimately bring that family back together. Because even the kids growing up, without a parent, that's not healthy for them, right? So if there's a system and there's a program where you can bring the family back together, you've seen some of our videos. We have Camille who does a family group, and so that's one of our kind of most profound groups, and that's a free resource that we give to everybody, whether they're in our programs or not.
Wow.
But that's like sometimes you have family members just kind of keeping things in for a long time and then using that as an opportunity to kind of speak out. So I kind of want to go back to you on terms of your experiences. I think it's unique to have somebody who's kind of been in the system, has navigated the system. A lot of the people we've talked to were all more in private practice or in professional treatment programs, treatment centers. Some deal with Medi-Cal. A lot of them is either private pay insurance. The beauty of it is with essential health benefits and kind of Affordable Care Act, the ability to access care has increased, and a lot of people now have access to care. But you're dealing with it within kind of the justice system,
Yes.
right? The courts. And so tell us a little bit about what that looks like. Let's start with, let's say that you're a parent and they've taken
Consistently for X amount of weeks, make sure it's the relevant substance pertaining to their case. I was calling service providers, getting a lot of this data collection, right, about what is their treatment goals. Are they in a MAT program? Are they on methadone? Are they taking that consistently? Another nuance of that, are they slowly tapering down? Because that's another issue we see in recovery, is that there's kind of like this plan that so-and-so is on this level of methadone, and for the unforeseeable future, they're just going to be relying on methadone. Very difficult.
Difficult to function with that, yeah.
Yeah, and difficult to get off of it, to stay on it. You know, I saw clients and families, right? I like to emphasize families because we're so individualistic, but one person affects a whole family. So I could see how it affected their day-to-day, and, you know, people were on the right path. Another aspect of my job was also observing how people in their capacities, whether they're dealing with their mental health, substance abuse, obviously, usually a combination of the two, how did that transcend to their parenting? Did they come to the visits maybe under the influence? If it wasn't what their usual drug is, did they appear to be under the influence of marijuana? Did they maybe have a couple of drinks before? You know, I've seen so many different things I cannot make up. So assessing the quality time that they had with their kids, do they have the capacity to be a full-time parent? Do they know what it's like to change a diaper, to feed the child, to promote on-task activities that promote the child's behavior, development, their growth, right? So that was a part of it. And when someone is under the influence all the time, or is in such a haze due to their substance abuse or mental health, you can barely take care of yourself. So how are you taking care of a kid? Right. So that was a lot of what I saw. And, you know, people have a way of beating the system. I often did see people somehow fight the toxicology report somehow. And, you know, I think something tough to reckon with is that recovery is not an one-size-fits-all solution. And people relapse. And there was these unfortunate truths. I saw people be sober for many months, and then one quick relapse, they got it all taken away.
Over.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned methadone. So, you know, because we do outpatient with Ocean Rock, but we have Beginnings and we have South Coast, and, you know, the different programs, we have different kind of leadership and things of that nature. But I've been involved in all three. And so, you know, that includes detox, residential, and then outpatient. And, you know, we do MAT, right? So MAT stands for medication assisted treatment. And, you know, there's different types of, you know, we have, you know, medical director, psychiatrist, and so they prescribe certain medications. But one thing we've found with methadone specifically is that whether it's, you know, we don't actually prescribe that. So we're not a methadone clinic. We don't do anything with methadone. But when it comes to methadone, a lot of the, you know, even some of our staff who like had been in programs before where they did that, they said, look, that was worse than actually being on regular drugs. Jesus. They're like, we can't, like, I don't want a life where I'm just have to take methadone, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as, even if that is something that for whatever reason made sense for their case, because it is case by case, you can't just do a blanket approach to everybody.
Yeah.
It might work for somebody and it might save their life. But it's just not something that should be promoted to the extent like everyone should take this, and then you know, it's kind of like there's no end date, right? It's like, oh, just take this for the rest of your life, right? So that has to be tapered down, and then eventually you don't want to change one addiction to another, right? Especially something that strong, because a lot of people that are on that, they just feel like they're in a constant haze while on that, even though it's a legal, you know, prescribed drug. So I think that was an interesting point that you brought up as far as you've seen that. And, you know, the goal is to taper down, because I think that's really something that some people don't think about, is no matter what you're on, ultimately you don't want to have to rely on all these different things. And you want to, maybe you do need some medication, but a combination of some medication, some therapy, you know, exercise, diet, you know, there's a holistic approach. But if you're too addicted to any one thing, then how's that a life that's worth living, right? And so I think a lot of people have to deal with all of that, right?
I think something that's interesting too is in your capacity, maybe people are more voluntarily admitting that they need help, and they might have more resources to be like, okay, let's give this a try. Let's make this work for me. The individuals I met with, they were often mandated, which in an ideal society, we should work towards getting people the help and the tools for recovery they need before letting it get to the place that you need to get your children removed, have a criminal court case against you, have a record in family court. That was a gap I often saw.
I see that. Okay.
And that as a service provider, that's a totally different way you work, right? When someone is forced to work with you versus when someone voluntarily has come into Ocean Rock, for example, and saying, I need help.
Right.
And the complexities of the human condition is like, you just could never tell how deeply someone is struggling, right? And it looks so different. And there can be very functional people. I'll be honest with you, in Manhattan Family Court, I saw very rich families that had substance abuse related issues.
Right.
And they could on paper present like everything is perfect. They have the house on Central Park West. They have their kids in private schools, but they are secretly suffering behind closed doors. And I think the complicated part as service providers is we want to meet the clients where they're at, and the clients have the dignity to choose how they want to proceed in their life. But we don't know if the abstinence model will always work. MAT approach will work, where it's more of a harm reduction, and that individual can decide, okay, I can eventually live without this substance. It's just everyone's response to these treatments is so different, and also where you are in your life, where you finally get it. You finally, like, something might click, and it might have to click 5-6 different times.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we've had people who, it's their first time in treatment, and we've had people who have been to 30 treatments in the last 3 to 5 years, right? And we're like, because we have to do a assessment, and we kind of say, what's your treatment history? And so, I mean, we've had people who, like I said, 30 plus treatments. It's nice when we have somebody who's just, it's their first time, because it's like, okay, well, hopefully we can kind of be their first and last. But I mean, our like thought process is always like, okay, whether it's your first time or your 30th time, we want this to be your last time. And like, what are you going to do differently this time that's going to change the narrative? But it is something that is hard to pin the kind of figure out exactly what, because people talk about rock bottom, people talk about this thing clicked, and it's hard to figure out exactly what that formula is, right? Like in humanity, we always try to figure out a formula, right? Like X plus Y or 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? And it's like, that's not how mental health works. That's not how addiction works. And that's not how sobriety works. I know people who just do AA, and they've been sober 30 years.
Yes.
I know people who do a combination of therapy. They do AA, they do, they take some medications, and that works for them, right? And then there's people who they're sober, and you're talking about, you've had families who they were doing well for a few months, and then you feel like, okay, things are moving in the right direction. And then they relapse, and that's they have to start over, right?
Yes.
And as somebody like you who's helping them, that's frustrating, because it's like you guys put all this effort into it, and I mean, you're more frustrated kind of for them. Yes. Right? Because you're like, you were almost there, right? And it's like but sometimes it's the pressure, and what we've seen, because we've had clients where they do really well, and some of them are like model clients, and then you get close to the time where they're supposed to discharge and kind of go back home, which is one of the reasons we did Ocean Rock, because even now you can go back home and virtually do the program.
Oh, that's great.
Right. And so Ocean Rock is predominantly a virtual program, right?
Beautiful.
And so the idea was, okay, well, one of the pain points that we saw was that people will do like a 30, 60, 90-day in-person program. Yeah. And then now you have to go back into your own environment. And we tell them, hey, like, because we have case management, and we try to set them up with, hey, here's some groups and here's some meetings, but then we lose that connection. We reach out, but it's not that like weekly connection, right? And then a lot of times people will relapse after that, or sometimes right in anticipation of that, because they're freaked out about kind of re-entering the society and kind of being self-functioning and all the responsibilities and headaches, and got to make money, you got to pay the rent, you got to take care of your kids, whatever it is, right? So, but I think, one thing I wanted to kind of go back and kind of explore a little bit further is, our programs, like you said, they're voluntary. And so people do not have to do them. And also they can leave, right? So like we can't keep anybody against their will. And some of them might have some legal challenges around it. So some people might be sentenced by the court, right, into one of our programs. And so if they fail, then they violate their probation, they go back to jail. So there is that component. Wow. That's heavy. And so that creates leverage, right? So I like to use the word leverage when I talk about that, because I think, one of the best case studies that I've seen as far as success rates in like substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment related to addiction has been like the PILOTS study, because I think a lot of people don't know, like, some pilots, obviously everyone deals with addiction. Doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, police officers, politicians, people in the streets, like, it doesn't matter who you are, right? It's like, it's the common denominator is it could care less whether you're rich, poor, black or white, or what religion you are, right? And so what I was kind of going back to is the fact that what was it? I forgot what I was saying. I think we were talking about the
pilot study.
Oh, the pilot study.
Yes.
There you go. So just like anyone else, I think doctors are a good case study too. But anyone who has like this license where if they do not do this program, they're going to lose that license. So they might be on suspension. We see that with some doctors. We see that with pilots. Any type of professional who's like their career and their success is tied to their license, whatever their governing body is, they have certain criteria, just like you guys do in the court system, where it's like, hey, they have to have so many clean tests and they have to be monitored, and there's kind of like this just random phone calls that they get, and they have to like go test within a certain amount of time. So but we found that those are like, I don't know I don't want to just throw out a number, but I've read some studies where there's 80-90% success ratios, right? And then you look at the general population, and a lot of the greatest population we see is the young adults, right? Now you're starting to see teens and adolescents too, but really the young, kind of 18 to 26, is a combination of failure to launch and just addiction and mental health and all the things. Like, that's the toughest cohort that we see. And that success ratio, I mean, I don't know the number, but it's low. It's very low. Like, it's just like saddening how low it is. And a lot of times it's like, well, what is the leverage? Like, I mean, and you would think that living, like staying alive would be leverage. But for some reason, when people are dealing with addiction, mental health, and are in that mindset, they're not thinking about that. Yeah. Like, they think about it after. They're like, when they're sober, they look back and they're like, that didn't make, like, why was I doing that? Or like they can judge other people who, now they're in the program, they're doing well, and somebody else is like, oh, well, what's wrong with that guy, right? Yeah. And that's how crazy it is. It's like, as soon as you're away from the drug for a certain amount of time, your brain starts thinking differently, and like so anyway, but the point I'm making is really, there is an opportunity to have a high success ratio, but because there's no leverage and there's nothing that ties this person to like, okay, well, if I do this, I'm going to go out and, get my license back or whatever it is, and there's no system like that, then that's where you see the kind of the weaker. So I always think if there's a way to create that leverage, to the best of our ability, we try to find, like, we fact find and we dig and we try to say, like, what is the leverage? We can really like use that as an incentive, other than, oh, well, you're going to die in the streets if you don't, because like that doesn't work. Like, you think that works, and we've tried that, and it's like, dude, you go out there, you're going to die. Well, they still go out. It's just, there's that. So there has to be something else. And so I want to explore, and the question I have for you is, in your experience dealing with the court system, where it's mandated, what are the leverage points that you use and that you've seen that work well for the success stories that you've had?
Yes. So a big leverage is for these parents who were involved in court, they get to ascend or move forward in their cases. So as long as they're compliant with what the judge and the courts are asking of them, they can slowly have more unsupervised times. They can slowly have sleepovers with their kids, and or the agency will help them secure housing because they're demonstrating that, okay, you're slowly getting ready to have a child, and let's prepare you with the resources in order for you to be set up for success. What's tough with substance abuse and just poverty and neglect and trauma is, I think we're finding though that the data shows that separating children and families does more harm than good,
right.
Even if it is such a volatile circumstance. And the parents I was working with kind of fit into your criterion where you're saying the young adults up until age 26. And that's a very tough age to be because your brain isn't fully developed. We live in a society right now, more than ever, recreational drug use is just normal.
Right.
And you don't know if you have a genetic propensity to become a full-fledged addict, or you can really use these drugs maybe recreationally. And even things like drinking, which I would say is more of a gateway drug to harder drugs than something like marijuana, where we live in a society, binge drinking is just normal as a young person. Yeah, you should just go out and drink every weekend like that, but it's not normal for a lot of people. It can spearhead a horrible trajectory, and especially alcoholism is something that progressively gets worse. So I think the leverage, that's a very important question. And in social work, I think we've learned that everything has to be client-centered, because if the client isn't buying in, there's no point in me fighting for the client. The client has to fight for it. The client, and maybe it's going to take 1 or 2 or 3 cases in family court. Maybe it's going to take you to get arrested for you maybe 1, 2, 3 times. I'm not sure, but I think the power truly lies in all of us. And we're there to guide people. The courts exist for a reason. They exist to help you get your shit together, maybe to get your kid back because your kid loves you.
Right.
But it really is in the eye of the control of the parent, the respondent in the situation, and you have to decide what kind of life you want to live. And, I'm all about destigmatization when it comes to drugs, when it comes to mental health, because we're often seeing that mental health causes people to abuse substances, right? If there's that underlying high levels of anxiety, depression,
trauma,
anxiety, you're just using those substances to quell
your self-medicating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I forgot where I was going with this, but just putting the power back in the individual.
Right.
And we're here, again, the courts exist for a reason. They do these things to protect society at large. But as individuals, you have to buy in. You have to want to protect yourself. You have to want to do better, not do perfect. Doesn't mean you'll never have a drink again in your whole life. I'm not going to be the person to tell you that, but you need to pave your own way for recovery so you can live a better life and not be in such a low place, right? I think the worst thing is when you see people so low, they've been through so much, self-inflicted or not, and I've been there personally, I'll be honest, when you're like, there's no reason to go forward. You're going through that low, but you have no one to tell you you're going to get through it.
Right.
Because all these things are temporary. You have your good seasons and your bad seasons.
Right. No, I hear you. I mean, I think that's such an important thing you said. You're not there to do the work for them.
Yes.
Right. And same mindset. We're here to hold out our hand and help you and kind of guide you along the way. And I think that's what you do, which is, through your case management, through your advocacy, you're fighting on their behalf and you're doing the best you can to promote their case. But at the end of the day, they have to do the work. They have to put in the effort. They have to want it. You can't want it more than they do.
Yes.
And I think that's one problem that I'd like to see if you see that too. But what I see is that, sometimes people are just either, I don't think it's laziness, but it's just almost this sense of entitlement where, well, I'm in this program, you guys need to do all this stuff for me. And it's well, that's not how it works, because you're if you could be in this program for the rest of your life, sure. If there was a program where for the rest of your life, we would do it for you, but that's not how this works, you know? Like, you're going to be here for a certain period of time. We're here to give you the tools, right, to succeed for the rest of your life, right?
And the end goal should be that we shouldn't be in their whole lives, right? As social workers, that's a little bit, that's a message that needs to be promoted a little bit more, that I want to be here for now while you're in crisis, while you're vulnerable, but you should not be reliant on me, because the moment I'm no longer monitoring your toxicology, you know, you don't have any urgency, and that might be indicative of you, where you're at, right? Like, you should have a sense of urgency in your life and reflect upon why you don't have that. And that's your own personal battle every human on this planet experiences. I will say now, working with, forced migrants, specifically, I have an initiative I'm working on with Afghans who are impacted by combat. Substance abuse in immigrant communities is really tough to talk about, because people are so focused on survivability. They're focused on, they're not thinking about their problems, even if they're very real problems, from mental health to substance abuse. It's like, oh no, that's fine. No, I never have that problem. Even, these are questions in your culture no one has ever asked you. So being vulnerable enough to say, like, hey, yeah, maybe I am drinking too much or smoking too much weed, and I'm not where I'm at in my life, that in itself is a hard question to grapple with, uniquely within immigrant communities, especially within some cultures where substance abuse might be really normal, right? Like binge drinking constantly, but knowing how that might be unhealthy in your life and in your future prospects, that's its own battle.
Tell us a little bit more about that. So for the immigrant community, is that in Washington, D.C. or New York?
Yes, that's what I'm doing now.
That's your current job at Asylum Works, right?
Yes.
And so tell me a little bit about that, because that just seems like something that the average person, including myself, who actually knows a lot about this stuff, is not very familiar with. So I'd love to learn more about what you do at Asylum Works, and what type of immigrants and what type of refugee or asylum that you guys are seeking.
So our clients are asylum seekers, and they can range from different immigration statuses. Can
you just tell us what is asylum?
Yes, asylum is basically, it's different from refugee status. Refugee status you often obtain before entering a country. As an asylum seeker, you get to the States and then you claim your asylum. Specifically, the programs or the grants in which I'm working under, these are individuals who are survivors of torture. So they might have experienced some sort of torture due to political affiliations, ethnicity, whatever you could think of to why you're marginalized in a society. Their lives are at risk, so they come to the U.S. to seek asylum. Another grant I'm working on is helping Afghans impacted by combat. So these were individuals who were working with the Afghan government, the US, the State Department, and after 2021, when the Taliban took over, they had no choice but to flee the country because their lives were at risk, and now they're here relocated in the US, starting at ground zero. That's another, that's a really hard thing to observe as an advocate. I'm helping these immigrants who were probably diplomats or, people very esteemed in their country have to come here and start at zero, right? I've seen people who were former professors in universities working at Chipotle just to make ends meet. So you can imagine the levels of stress these people are going through, especially with their immigration cases pending, and we don't know what the future government might look like with this upcoming election season. So this is a population that's under so many stresses, in addition to not only their cultural stresses of having to provide and establish themselves and assimilate to the U.S. and learn to navigate this new life of, starting from zero. And what I see, because we work with people from Ethiopia, from Afghanistan, from different Latin American countries, is I'm still getting more experience when it comes to substance abuse and monitoring that, because I think in the immigrant population, and every immigrant group is different too, so I want to disclaim that, is that it's going to take some time for them to maybe even acknowledge they might have issues. It might not happen the first time they come in for the intake. even, what I'm finding in immigrant populations is it's hard to ask for help because we're so used to being self-sufficient. I got to this country on my own. I'm going to go out and find work. I'm going to earn my income. I don't need you to tell me what to do, even though we're here to help you, be your guide. So we help you how to navigate these difficult bureaucracies, get you set up with attorneys, so on and so forth. So when I think you might see the similar theme in your offices, that you're dealing with people who might be in that pre-contemplation phase, that maybe I have a problem, I know something's not right. But it takes you to be truly secure, and set aside your ego and set aside reckoning with the fact that you are flawed, because we all are flawed, that, I might need help when it comes to this. I think something that's really tough is mental health is not a common topic in our culture, Middle Eastern cultures. It's a lot of cultures, it's so stigmatized that even the idea of getting a referral for an outpatient group or going to AA or even meeting with a therapist once to talk about the combat trauma you experienced in Afghanistan, because these individuals, they lived through the trauma, they still, it's hard to receive help. So I think that's a theme that I'm observing in an ongoing manner and trying to normalize, because you're going through so many changes culturally, with what you're exposed to. And then, you're going to probably have some psychological stressors along the way, and you might have some maladaptive coping mechanisms you pick up too. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's such a specialized field that you're in, and it's such a subset of the immigrant population. Because I know there's a lot of, and we're not going to go into all the ideology behind like immigration and kind of, legal versus illegal and all that, because I think there's a lot of different points of view. And, I think that what you're dealing with is really not what's in the news, right? What you're dealing with is these are kind of people who are seeking asylum, who their lives are at stake. They're fleeing the country because of, they're afraid for their life, for their family's life. And ultimately, like, especially in the cases that you're saying of Afghanistan and these are people who, the U.S. went over there and they were actually helping the U.S. So they were not the enemy. They're the people who are like working with us. Yeah. And then now that, kind of U.S. left and it's kind of a little bit of a shit show over there. And now they're like, well, we can't live here anymore, right? So they're coming here and seeking asylum. So now you're dealing with these families. And I think one thing you said, which is it doesn't matter kind of who it is, it's just the stigma around mental health addiction. And I kind of look at it as addiction and substance use kind of has the highest stigma, because I've seen a lot, even in just non-refugee, non-asylum, non-immigrant, just in general population, is, oh, I'm doing drugs, is like, no one wants to talk about that, right? Like eventually you do it, but just in general, like people don't want to admit that. They don't want to tell their partners about that. They don't want to admit it to themselves that they're addicted, And then it's, okay, well, mental health is starting to become a little bit more of a kind of common theme and words that we hear. People have therapists, and it's okay to go to therapy, and it's actually healthy for you, and it's part of a lifestyle, right? So like when you change it from like you're going to therapy because you're sick to, hey, this is part of a healthy lifestyle, you're doing the same thing. You're getting therapy and it's helping you, but instead of looking at it as a negative thing, you're looking at it as a positive thing, right? So I think one of the ways to, destigmatize and promote mental health and recovery, whether it's recovery from drugs or from just, anxiety, other disorders, is that to be positive, right? And I think there's so many people focus on kind of like what they want to project, like this is the way I believe it should be done, or like this is the way we do it, or this is the way I did it. And I think that's where the dogma, when you have a lot of dogmatic talk, that's where you get stuck. And so, ultimately I think for destigmatization, addiction, is something that is starting to scratch the surface, and people are feeling more comfortable talking about it. But mental health is really kind of where the focus is right now, as far as like getting people to kind of buy into that. And what I've found, and I can't, even in Ocean Rock, like our personal mindset, from the way we kind of run the program, at least our goal, because it's challenging. It's challenging to kind of
some people just want to focus on their addiction. Some people just want to focus on their mental health. Some people, do what we call dual diagnosis, which is we help them with both. But in the beginning, everyone thinks like, oh, I'm with this group or I'm with that group. And they think, well, we're different. And it's like, no, we're not different, because at the end of the day, to me, substance use, the formal name is substance use disorder.
Yes.
That's the DSM. So that's a subset of mental health.
Yes, exactly.
Anxiety, depression, bipolar, mood disorders, substance use disorder. Like, these are all, to me, like, not separate things.
Yes.
These are all part of mental health. So we like to look at it as mental health as the overall umbrella. And then these are all subsets of that. And then, depending on if you have one of these or two of these or three of these, some people have all of these. And it's like, okay, let's tackle that, right? And that's a comprehensive approach to treatment.
Something I like to tell, at my current position, how I kind of sell therapy, because it does need a little bit of selling,
Right.
is like when you have a cut or a gash on your knee, right? You go to a doctor and they disinfect it. They let you know if you need stitches, if you'll need a surgery, and you take the time to go get that attention. Something like mental health that does not have a straightforward solution. It's not you wake up the next day and all your anxiety is gone. I wish it was that easy, geez. But you need to take that 1 hour a week to speak with your clinician in a confidential manner, that this is a third party member just who doesn't know anything about your life on a day-to-day basis, who knows a little bit about your history, but is truly non-judgmental and is just going to be a listening ear. And that's something so many people lack, because I think often when we do try and seek help from our communities or our family, everyone is just trying to come at you like, just quit, just don't smoke anymore, just don't do this, don't do that. When you do, I think therapy is one of the best tools to take care of yourself in the long term, in this day and age, especially where we're so hyperstimulated and overly connected. So, and, just to go back about addiction and stigmatization, it's interesting how we celebrate some addictions, and then some addictions are just not, you're the worst of the worst if you're a drug addict or whatever, or whatever the case may be. So if you're a workaholic and you're addicted to eating,
Right.
You're addicted to working out and you're fit and you present to be perfect, wow, those are good addictions, right? Society is applauding you every step of the way, but God forbid you're suffering in silence and you might present okay, and you have these really real issues that you're going to experience backlash disclosing that to your loved ones. These are people who are feeling devalued and not worthy. And, as someone who I'm trying to moderate my own drinking too, because I'm finding as I'm getting older, it doesn't help. I idealize the people with those other socially acceptable addiction, saying oh, wow, maybe I should be better like that. I should be more addicted to my work or working out, when that also isn't healthy too. So we should realize how addiction is prevalent. Everyone experiences it, but our society really applauds some people who are addicted to certain things. And then the ones who, need more help, we need to work towards destigmatizing getting help.
Right. No, I agree with you. I mean, I think you see it on social media a lot, and it's like what I think is the most effective way to live your life is balance, right? Balance is one word. It's very simple, balance. Now, how do you achieve balance? That's the challenge.
Yes.
Right. But, you definitely you should work out, right? I mean, working out I'll use myself as an example, if I work out 3 to 4 days a week and I go for an hour, I do some cardio, I do some weights.
Yeah.
It's a combination. I'm not trying to be huge. I'm not trying to be too skinny. It's kind of a balanced approach. And I used to approach it before where I was like, no, I want to get buff. So I would go do all these weights, and then I'd get injured, and then I had to then now I'm like, oh, now I'm injured for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go through that cycle, right?
Exactly.
And then sometimes no, I want to lose weight. So you're doing all this cardio, and then you're not feeling good. So even with working out, there's balance, right?
Yes.
And so ultimately I'm like, well, I don't really I don't have an aesthetic goal, right?
Yeah.
I want to live as long as I can, right? I want to have a healthy heart. I want to be able to lift things that I need to. I want to be able to move. I want my bones to be strong.
Yes.
And so when you look at it as I want to be a functioning human being, and to have as much longevity as I can, then you approach it differently because then you have a different goal, right? And I think sometimes it's like you can be doing something and have a different goal and then achieve a different outcome. And some of the outcomes are more short term because we've even seen people who are like Mr. Olympia, this and that, and now they can't even walk, right?
Of course.
And so, I think Ronnie Coleman's like a good example of that. And so it's like, okay, well, those immediate successes and kind of that short-term thinking is and if that's all you want, then that's fine. Like, I mean, some people, they're like, I don't care about what I do at 70 years old. Like, I just want to live the best life I can. And even if I die at 40, well, if that's your mentality, then that's your mentality. So I think just like you, I'm not here to tell anyone to do it a certain way. Yeah. But if your goal is longevity, and I think most of our goal, I think the overall population, our goal is longevity, right? We want to live as long as possible, as long as we live a healthy life.
A good life,
and a good life, right? And so, and while you do that, you have to deal with all kinds of diseases and, whether it's cancers or mental health, addiction, and all these things. So it's challenging, but the goal is longevity, right? And so I think that was a kind of good example you said, is like, well, you can't be addicted like working out 6 hours a day. I have to work out 7 days a week. And if I don't, and it's not about the working out, like you could actually work out 7 days a week if you can do that in a balanced way. Yes. But it's, if you don't work out 1 day or 2 days and you feel like the whole world is going to explode, that's the unhealthiness. So how do you test whether or not there's an addiction? Well, you need to kind of take yourself away from it for a little bit and see if you can still function,
And we live in a society that disordered behavior patterns is applauded when it comes to these, socially acceptable behaviors. So I think the short term, that was a great thing to bring to view, because I think for people who are in therapy, the therapist helps you realize why you might have had a bad day some week, why something random triggered you. And you're kind of, because I've been there, you're like, wait, today wasn't as good as yesterday. And like, let me think about what's going on in my brain. Did someone say something that triggered me to go to a certain place that wasn't healthy? So like, knowing that having those bad days, those low moods, knowing that something you can come across in your life that you would never realize triggers you, and having the space to talk about it so you can know yourself better is the path towards a balanced life, right? Is the path towards recovery that is formulated in a way for you, because you are the only person living your life, building your future, and you have to make it work for you. Right. And I'm personally doing this in my own life, and it's actually very liberating. It's freeing to kind of reflect. Remember, you have the power. Just because society is telling you to do this, to go and party and go do, have this amount of money and stuff, you actually stop giving power to all the externals, and you re-give the power to yourself, and you are actually happier living that balanced life that you can achieve. I think something to note too, though, is that life is hard and it's never going to be fully perfect. I think in this day and age, there's so much like toxic positivity. There's so much like, oh, if you want something, go out and work for it, which is good. We should have ambition. We should have consistency, but do expect mistakes along the road. Do expect to take those 2 days off, because as humans, we need rest. We need to recalibrate this plan that's ever evolving, because you just never know what's going to happen to you, to your family, to your job, to your country. So I think being clear with yourself, being real with yourself, and also maintaining some level of flexibility is the key in how you can achieve some sort of long-term recovery and make therapy work for you.
Yeah, those are great points. I think one thing that just to kind of piggyback off that is, all this effort, all this work, all this thought, all this stuff, and then all of a sudden somebody passes away, right? And so you see that in the news a lot. Obviously, people deal with that within their own families and within their own kind of ecosystem. But then, you don't hear about that, right? You don't hear about this guy's dad or brother or son, right? What we hear is in the news. Oh, this celebrity or this politician, like whoever, right? And so we see that all the time, and it's, well, that doesn't matter. Like we know that as a general population, everyone is dealing with this. Yes. And so whether it's the two big ones we see is overdose or suicide, right? So people are either passing away maybe it's fentanyl, maybe it's a suicide, and we see that all the time. Just the other day I was reading about it. And so to me, it's like the scarcity of life, right? Like the value it has and the scarcity of time, right? And so like even driving here, I was thinking it's raining, it's this and that. And, I'm like, it's not a big, we're in Southern California. So whenever it rains, we're like, oh my God. But
the end of the world here.
Right? But no, I was just thinking, I was like, anything could happen at any time. And it's not even in your control. Somebody else makes a mistake or somebody else, something happens and you're just going about your own way. So I think giving up a little bit of control. That's one thing that crossed my eyes. Like so much, we want to have so much control over our life, over our path, like even over our recovery, over whatever it is. And it's like what I've seen in the clients who succeed and have the highest chance of success in our programs are the ones that surrender control, right? And they're willing to just absorb and take in and kind of, it's like they're a newborn baby. And they have a much higher chance of success. And it's the ones that they think they know better and they think that, okay, now I'm detoxed for a few days and I'm good. Or, now I've been to a lot of groups. I know what you guys are talking about. It's like listening and hearing and absorbing are different things. Those are kind of different layers of things, right? A lot of people listen and they hear, but they don't absorb and it doesn't become part of them, right? I think that's a big difference because you could have gone to multiple programs and like heard the same thing over and over, but it only clicks when you're willing to let it absorb and surrender and really like live it.
Yeah, there's a couple, I love how you bring up the family unit, and it kind of goes back to this theme that I talked about in my early career about working with families. And, AA even has recovery groups for children of alcoholics, right? Like, even though, American culture, we're very individualistic, we're thinking about, and it's true, we do need to have individual treatment plans, so on and so forth. But when you take control over your life, you become a better person, not only for yourself, but for your family. And I think what you see too is how all these addictions affect the family at large. And that's really hard because you're destructing yourself and you're hurting a lot of people in that process. And that's really hard. Something else I wanted to bring up too is like we live in a time where there's so much more convenience, and I think in our generation we are uncomfortable being uncomfortable. But in order to grow, you need to be put in uncomfortable situations. You need to take risks, and you need to be truly honest with yourself instead of being like, yeah, I know what these meetings are about. Like, I'm off of the substance for 7 days. I'm good. No, it's deeper than that. It's even probably predates your substance abuse history and why you are the way you are. So knowing that it takes a sort of humbleness to be like, okay, I don't know the answers. I'm on my journey. I'm going to sit through the bad moments. I'm going to sit through those withdrawals. I'm going to sit through those anxious nights where I'm no longer on my substance of choice and I'm detoxing because I know a week from today, I'm going to be so happy that instead of choosing to relapse, I chose to write out that bad mood. I chose to write out with that withdrawal.
I think that's exactly right. And then while they're doing that, pick up the phone if you need help.
Yes.
And I think that's the biggest message that we can send to anybody is, you need to do the work and you need to put in the effort and you need to do exactly what you said. But if you have any thoughts of killing yourself or using, there are a lot of people who are there to just listen to you in that moment. And if you just need somebody to talk to you to get you off that ledge, do not feel ashamed because they are, whether it's our program or other programs or there's hotlines, it's your friends, they're not going to judge you in that moment. Do not overthink that. Pick up the phone, call the first person that you can. And then if they don't pick up, call the next person and then call the next. We all have, even if it's somebody you haven't talked to for a while, it doesn't matter who it is, because the second you start talking about it and somebody's that process increases the chance of your survival significantly. The fact that you got out of your own head, picked up the phone and started talking to somebody, that by itself might get you over that hurdle. And then obviously then take the next steps and, whether it's go to treatment or go to therapy or whatever it is, right? But just pick up the phone.
Yeah, reaching out to your loved ones, right? Going your family, and
or anyone. I mean, really,
yeah,
at that point, it's just like anyone who's gonna pick up, because it's like, well, maybe they're worried that they don't want to tell their parents or their
yes.
or their significant other, right?
Yeah.
So like, I get a lot of times the reason people don't pick up the phone is because they're so ashamed of the information that like they are about to, like they can't even fathom it in their own head. But that's where you got to get outside of yourself, you know?
Because we all have issues. Even the most perfectly manicured, successful people in the society have issues. And like, that's what keeps us connected. That's what the universal human condition is. So, and I think it speaks to the effectiveness of recovery, right? AA for some people, when that works, what is the number one thing that they need? A sponsor.
Right.
Because humans need each other. And we're, like I said, living in a hyper independent, hyper convenient society when we need to realize that, yeah, you need to be uncomfortable sometimes to move forward. And that means being vulnerable. So therapy is a good way to try and learn how to be vulnerable and to organize those emotions that are very complicated, because oftentimes we're not taught how to have healthy relationships and how to regulate our emotions. So yeah, I times 10, piggyback, support your message, that ask for help. No one can do anything in life alone. You really can't.
Right. Yeah. And I think whether it's, individual counseling is really helpful, individual therapy, but also that group therapy or group support groups, whatever it is, like a group setting. Like, I think that the group plus the individual is really where you get the most value, because you can work on yourself, but then you can also kind of work with other people and you can learn from each other.
In the same exact position.
And then you're not alone,
Yeah, and I think there's something beautiful about treatment, in a sense. Schedule the individual therapy on a time, like let's say it's Friday after work when you're maybe used to using or going out for drinks. And instead you schedule your therapy at that time so you can prevent your relapse. The group therapy is beautiful too, because you are not alone in this heavily stigmatized version of yourself. There's millions of people walking the face of this planet with the same exact issue as you, in a different history, in a different capacity, but you're not alone. And I think that's half of what people need to hear, that you're not alone with your mental health or your substance abuse problems. Like, these substances are kind of manufactured for you to get addicted, right? It's a matter of, like, did you have the genetic propensity to become a more severe, to be more severely reliant? And, there's a combination of environmental, biological reasons as to why that is.
Right.
But
some of them doesn't even matter. Like, it's, you take it once and you might have thought you were taking something else. I mean, there's a lot. It's just getting crazy as far as how many things are out there and how addictive they are. It doesn't matter who you are. And it just kind of takes, and then it's like you don't even sometimes get a second chance because it's so lethal,
Exactly.
One thing I wanted to close on, and unless you want to talk about anything else, but one thing I wanted to close on is, as a mental health worker, what are kind of the top 3 things that you do for yourself to kind of take care of yourself?
$1 million question, and it's an ongoing battle. And so I think for someone in social work, for sure, working with people, you experience what's called secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, and emotional exhaustion. So the number one thing I do is I meet with an individual therapist, whether it's biweekly or weekly, just to have that outlet that's not my family, not my partner, not my colleagues, to truly just talk about, an hour a week, what's going on with me? Am I not feeling my best? Am I feeling great? And why did I feel so good? So that's number one. Where I'm at now at 29, if you asked me this question 5 years ago, would have been very different. I think for me, it's building a routine is second, very important. So, and this is hard at my age because I've substituted, going out to the bar on Fridays and Saturdays every weekend to staying in, because I know that's going to set me up for a better weekend, which is going to set me up for a better work week. So I do try and still have fun, but I make sure I'm intentional. I make sure that I'm still planning my workouts. I'm making sure to get to acupuncture, whatever are those self-care tasks that make me feel good when it comes to my mood and my nutrition. These are very underrated things that slowly we're starting to learn more about, but do monumental things for your mental health. I'll be honest with you, when I went to school, social work school at NYU, one of my professors was saying self-care is going out for margaritas with your friends and, just get a massage. And those are all good things, but they're so momentary, right? They're before you know it, actually that happy hour where you had a couple too many margaritas leaves you with a worse mental health place the following day, and that ruins your day. So I think just, again, you have to fight a narrative like we're talking about, fighting that narrative that just go spend money on a facial or a massage or that vacation that you probably can't afford. That's not that. These are all temporary fixes. So investing in your health when it comes to nutrition, movement, I don't even want to say exercise, just something that brings you joy is really important. I think the third thing too is reflecting on what brings you joy and purpose outside of your job. I work in DC, a lot of work-obsessed people, and people are really trying to climb the ladder, and it's really inspiring in a lot of ways. You see all these successful people, it's easy to idealize them. They might have everything put together, but when you take a bird's eye view, you often see people who are so work addicted or, obsessed with their career. That's all they have going for them. That's their whole personality.
It's their whole identity.
So all they're doing is going to work, going to happy hour after work, then doing the same thing, and you end up not even really spending time with your families, your loved ones, or visualizing your life outside of just this drudgery of going to work, and then you kind of blow off steam from going to happy hour, and then you do it all again. So I think what I've been recently trying to do is take a step back and think about what are hobbies that bring me joy in my life. So I study Spanish. I'm also learning Japanese right now, just to kind of also navigate and turn those wheels in your brain that don't have to do with work, and that remind you that you have a purpose beyond your income, your titles, all the drudgery that modernity has put on us. So therapy is helpful as a mental health professional, taking care of your fitness and nutrition, and that's always fun. It's actually a fun thing to do. It's not just boring. You don't have to eat boring, healthy food. There's so much good, tasty food you can cook yourself and have control over what you're eating. And then just thinking about your purpose and your joy outside of your job, and what are the everyday activities we might take for granted that actually make our life worth living and help us feel fulfilled. Right.
No, that's awesome, Nassym. So Nassym, she's I don't know if I said this earlier, but she's my cousin. So we grew up together in Orange County. I've known her since she was born, and she's now gone to New York and got all these fancy degrees from all these top schools.
They don't pay too well, but yeah.
Well, and and I mean, she had a choice, right? So she could have done whatever she wanted to. She had the support from the family and just kind of her own ambition and work ethic, but she chose this path to help other people because it brings her the most reward internally, even though it's such an exhausting and kind of sometimes there's not a lot of appreciation.
Definitely.
But one thing I'm kind of hearing from you, and it's nice as kind of your older cousin to hear, is that now that you're transitioning from late 20s to early 30s, it's kind of a pivot point, where you could go in different directions. One direction could be oh, okay, let's keep going with this mentality of because some people want to be young forever and think they're never gonna, until it becomes too late, and then life punches them in the face. But you're kind of transitioning correctly in terms of, hey, you know what, I'm going into my 30s, probably want to start a family soon. I want to have control over my day, my week, every afternoon, every night, everything. These things are all in combination. Now, doesn't mean you're not going to have fun, right? Doesn't mean you're going to deprive yourself. But I think that you're doing things based on everything you just said as far as self-care, your weekly therapy, acupuncture, movement, getting your body moving, just substitution.
Yes.
It's like even when you go to a restaurant, it's like if you substitute a couple of the side dishes or
Yes.
dressings, like you can go to the same restaurant and have a healthy meal, right? You don't have to not go to restaurants. Like people can do what they want to do and what they enjoy, just do it in moderation and be mindful of the fact that like, hey, once in a while I can kind of splurge on something, but at the end of the day I need to be consistent. And so you're definitely headed in the right direction.
I hope so.
And I wanted to just let you know how proud I am of you.
Oh, thank
and
you.
how much I love you. So
Oh, thank you.
thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.